there's been good progress on crime at large, which was already tapering down. And at some point, the FBI and the DOJ doesn't get to say, we did our job, therefore excuse us for not doing our job on the other issues. There's been zero deep state accountability, but the low-hanging fruit, here's a little chunk of meat for the dogs, us being the dogs, was announcing, or at least announcing of a criminal investigation into Jerome Powell of the feds, which, I mean, it'll make people happy, but it's not what, that's a ex post facto, because what the Trump administration was elected on was going after those who partook in stealing the election in 2020, COVID tyranny, January 6th tyranny. We've seen none of it, but if we can touch on Jerome Powell being investigated criminally for allegedly lying to, what was it, Congress or the Senate oversight?
Basically, they only did Barris and I and some other people were up there causing a storm. And then finally, they take action on a referral that came many months before, like 7 months before, going back June, July. Congresswoman Luna is doing very good work. Congresswoman Luna is trying to ban stock trading by the insiders in Congress. Congresswoman Luna is exposing Ukraine's religious discrimination against Orthodox Christians in their country. She's called for peace and diplomacy involving Russia. Congresswoman Luna opposed the funding of the NED. So she's doing a lot of good work. She was outraged that Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, a appointed official by the president with the consent of the Senate, came before them and told them that he was not doing all these big billion-dollar-plus charges for their new Fed building, all paid for by taxpayer money. Private banks that own the subdivision individual federal banks, Federal Reserve banks. In terms of, it's a complicated structure, but they have an incentive, and they should be paying for this, not the American taxpayer anyway. But I mean, talking about like marble floors and marble this and marble that and special fountains, and I mean, spent over $1 billion overrun, and then he lied about it to Congress. And this comes from a Federal Reserve that has board members that he was part of recommending that had committed mortgage fraud, like Lisa Cook, that have committed insider trading again and again and again without criminal prosecution. And he goes out last Sunday night in order to try to sink the markets and say, I mean, all they did was send him a subpoena because they'd sent him investigative requests and he refused to answer any of them, refused to talk to any of them, because he's the Federal Reserve chairman. He's Mr. Central Bankster. You don't get to dictate to him. You don't get to control. You don't get any authority, any accountability with him. Just like you, that's why you've had all these insider traders, rogue banksters, mortgage fraudsters running our economy into the ground, like the Fed has done for the last 2 decades plus, doing things that were never constitutionally or congressionally authorized anyway. But he tries to sink the markets as punishment for them simply sending him a subpoena to produce the evidence and information that he should have produced honestly to Congress 6 months ago. And he's like, this is an assault on the independence of the central bank. There is no independent central bank in the Constitution. To have an independent central bank makes it unconstitutional by definition. There's many law. If you look at the non-delegation doctrine, you look at the principal officer doctrine, you look at separation of powers doctrine, you look at the political control over elected officials and the removal power doctrine that we've been talking about now, that's been more robustly developing for the last 4 or 5 years. The Fed shouldn't exist. Period.
But back it up just a little bit, because people have to appreciate this. The Federal Reserve is not a government entity. It's not a government body. And so the argument
parts of it are, and parts of it are not. And that's what makes it a disaster.
Okay.
So it's created by the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. But let's remember, first central bank, first national bank of the United States, President Thomas Jefferson, one of our founders, got rid of it because he realized what a scam it was. Go back and read what he said about the risk of having these central banksters print your currency. Then the second national bank comes along, and President Andrew Jackson shut that bank down. Thank God. Another great populist American. So we didn't have any of these central banksters until J.P. Morgan decided to hang out. You can read the great book by my friend G. Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Beautiful little island, by the way. I've been there for a George Gammon event and some other events. Talking about the whole nasty, pernicious, sneaky history of the Federal Reserve. I mean, in 1913, we get the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson, which brings us to World War I, by the way. the Birth of a Nation launched and the beginnings of the Ku Klux Klan, thanks to Woodrow Wilson. First movie ever shown in the White House was Birth of a Nation, which is like one battle after another, which is being used by the Oscars in Hollywood to try to promote these ICE attacks and terrorism that we're seeing against ICE across the country that we'll get to in a bit. The same 1913, they passed the income tax. They proposed the 16th Amendment. I'm sure it's just a big coincidence that they get the 16th Amendment income tax through the same year they do the Federal Reserve Act. And the people crafting and drafting this Federal Reserve Act are a bunch of banksters. But it was disguised as ways to regulate those Wall Street people. We need to regulate them, even though it was written by the biggest Wall Streeters of them all. Probably a sign it wasn't there for. But the Federal Reserve Act creates all these unconstitutional provisions. It creates the Federal Open Market Committee, which has on it almost half the people on it, 5 of the 12 people on it, are not appointed by the president, are not appointed not confirmed by the Senate, and are not removable by the president. They create a law that says the Board of Governors, that's the government entity, is the Board of Governors. So you got a Federal Reserve that's not quite government, but you got a Board of Governors that is, and then you got the Federal Reserve Bank individual banks, which are capitalized by private banks, which helps select who serves as board of directors on those banks. So you got you got a true creature from Jekyll Island. You got a legislative nightmare that appears to have no constitutional tethers or roots. And in my opinion, it violates the non-delegation doctrine because they're given boundless standards to do whatever they want. This is legislative power. They're making rules governing our monetary system. That should be determined by Congress. It violates the major questions doctrine. It violates the non-delegation doctrine for an executive branch body to be doing Congress's business, the legislative body's business. Second, it violates the principal officer doctrine, which means any principal officer which has major influence over our government policy has to be appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Many of the people that are on the Federal Reserve Board are not that. They have never received approval or the rest. Third, you have the removal doctrine, which is that everybody that has principal officer power must be removable at will. And by the President of the United States.
This is the crux of the entire scandal, so to speak, is that people are saying, well, Trump can't fire Jerome Powell because he's appointed and technically, I don't know, is not a member of the executive, so he can't be fired by the president, although he can be removed for bad behavior. And people are saying, well, this is pretextual. Trump is trying to manufacture some lying under oath or lying to Congress to get rid of him. Others are saying his term is up. If I'm not mistaken, Robert, his term is up, Jerome Powell, in May of this year.
As chair. There's chair and then his term on the board itself, which he could continue on.
Okay.
But the other problem is, this is Congress created this nightmare creature.
An unaccountable blob is what it is.
Completely. And to give you an idea of how unaccountable they are, the Federal Reserve is exempt from many FOIA laws. I've FOIA'd the Federal Reserve, so been at it for a long time. Gaiman and I have been doing this for about 4 years. They deny it, we come back, make another request. They deny it, we come back, make another request. We figure out it's here. They're hiding it there. They're hiding it over here. But one of the things they always rely upon is that many of their subdivisions. Hold on a second. I got to get this.
Yeah, I was actually just going to bring this up in our vivabarneslaw.locals.com community, which is a good meme. End the Fed. What happened to George Gammon taking on the Fed? Seems like he's given up on that. I don't know that they've given up. Barnes will get back to it in a second. I'm actually curious as to what phone call he had to take in that point. And I'll continue with Jerome Powell. Jerome. I'm pronouncing like a French Canadian because his name is Jerome, and my best friend up in Canada is named Jerome. Is that people are hypothesizing this is to get Jerome Powell out of his position because he can't be fired, but like Barnes says, he could still stay on the board. And then the other subsidiary argument is that Trump is sending a message to any future appointee that he does appoint when Jerome Powell's tenure is over, that is, you better do what is in my administration's policy's best interest, or we'll find a reason to get you out as well. I don't think this is quite as pretextual when we get into the nature of the charges of the dishonesty and just the abject, grotesque incompetence. Jerome Powell should be nowhere near governing other people's money. Sorry, Robert, what were you saying?
Oh, exactly. But here's what Congress has exempted the Federal Reserve from many FOIA laws. They've exempted them from the Sunshine Laws. That's what allows them to meet in secret at these open market committee meetings. Even though that is entirely controls government monetary policy that radically and dramatically influences us in the world. If anything should be subject to Sunshine Laws, they should be. They are exempt from congressional, because they receive their money from private banks and self-funding, they're exempt from the entire congressional appropriations process, which means they're outside much of congressional oversight, including audits and financial reviews. They are also exempt from the Government Accountability Office, so they can't be audited by the government. So this is why people like Ron Paul and Rand Paul and Thomas Massie and others have been calling for auditing the Fed for a long time. It was something DOJ was going to do when suddenly Soros, Scotty Bessent. I said I wasn't going to use this phrase that often, but I got to do it now.
You didn't get a cease and desist, Robert?
No, not yet. I got advisements that he is aware of of me popularizing that reference. So hey, quit backing up the Federal Reserve, Soros, Scotty. I won't call you Soros, Scotty. On top of that, you've got. And then they're outside a whole bunch of other processes because a bunch of their people are not even publicly appointed in the first place, and they're said you can't remove them except for cause. That is an unconstitutional constraint on the president's executive office. What it creates is a technocratic, bankster-driven elite that serves the interest of Wall Street against the interest of the American people. And anybody that says they're technocratic geniuses, look back at the last 50 years and tell me the Fed has been any kind of geniuses. For a while, they were reporting to the Treasury. Harry Truman was getting people fired all the time. So until 1951, they used to peg the interest rates to whatever the Treasury dictated. So this idea that they've always been independent is actually nonsense. But the mere idea of an independent Federal Reserve is anti-American and anti-constitutional. And that alone is warrant Powell's firing. But the evidence is abundant that he's also a criminal stealing billions of dollars from the American people.
The denials, I won't bring up the list. They involve denials of no VIP dining room, no new marble, no water, no beehives, no roof terrace gardens.
A roof terrace garden.
No, mischaracterizing of the expenses. I mean, we were there where we saw the back and forth with Trump where he said you're $1 billion over budget. It's like, oh no, that was for the other building or that was for another part. Bottom line, that, when Trump makes a mistake, and I put that in quotes, that was a strategic mistake because it highlighted even within the own renovations of that building. Why in the name of sweet holy hell, A, would American taxpayers pay for that? And B, how in the name of sweet holy hell can you be so far over budget, whether or not Trump included a building that ought not have been included? He's objectively egregiously over budget and is yet somehow in charge of managing the most fundamental financial elements of American society and American government.
Precisely. Not only that, ever since COVID, ever since 2008, they've just been giving themselves more and more power to do more and more things. You could have a de facto central bank digital currency issued by the Fed by how much power they've grabbed. That was part of what inspired George. But to the question that people ask about Gammon, we've continued to keep doing the FOIA request so that they block us here, so we go over here. Then they block us here, so we go over there. And they always buy time. They always get extensions and extensions and extensions. And so it's just been around and around and around with the Federal Reserve now. And we've got a lot more intel and information. We're going to be not far away from the point we can give out free templates so you can FOIA the Federal Reserve out there, and you can make Jerome Powell's life utterly miserable. We're getting closer and closer to that template, but we had to know where they hide the bodies, which means how do they index the documents? Where do they store the documents? What are the ways that you can get FOIA to be able to pull the documents and to disclose the documents? It's understanding the inside of the FOIA system in order to unravel it, which the FOIA department at the Fed is just as corrupt as the one at the FBI and the DOJ, because they are still blocking Tom Fitton's many different FOIA requests related to whether it's J6 cases, related to whether it's the Seth Rich case, that they're sabotaging, and they're just doing the deep state's bidding top to bottom, left to right, because Pam Bondi and counterfeit cash can't do their job. Or the job they see it as doing is covering up for the donor pals and not serving the interest of the American people.
Let me just summarize a few key points before we head off of the Jerome Powell. The investigation is, I'm not putting words in your mouth. It's my opinion. It's absolutely righteous. The guy's incompetent, corrupt, and dishonest. Set that aside. The idea of investigating him, they won't get anything done before his term is over, but this might preclude him from continuing to sit on the board, although he wouldn't be the chair. And this sends a strong signal to anybody else coming in. You'd better be responsible, you'd better be diligent, you'd better be honest, and you better not bilk American taxpayers for your own opulent, lavish expenses. That's the bottom line.
You're not above the law. You're not above the law. I mean, wasn't that the Democratic slogan back in 2022? Well, who it should absolutely apply to is the Federal Reserve Chairman, who has been acting above the law since the law was passed. And it's long overdue he be held accountable and we start reconsidering the role and power this institution has.